Hello everyone, welcome to Dhriti 365. Uh, it's been quite a while now that I have made the video. The reason I am not going to give any reasons as such. It was a mistake on my part, and I am planning to cover it all as uh, as soon as possible. So today is 14th, and I need to cover like 7 days, I mean a week of backlogs. So it's fine, it's fine. I will try to cover it as soon as possible. But before I cover anything, now that it was a long 7 days break, I needed to first go through all the things that I have prepared till now, so that the continuum is not broken. So this video is going to be a bit longer than other videos. In this video, I'm going to like revise all the concepts that I have written till now. So starting with political theory, meaning and its approaches. First is these are the PYQs that I said earlier. Behavioralist revolution significance, normative versus empirical. Political theory is not an escape mechanism but arduous calling. David Easton's model of system analysis, post behavioralist approach, postmodernism, political theory decline, resurgence, significance of normative approach, importance of behavioralist approach, decline of political theory, system approach, normative approach, decline of political theory, credo of relevance. This is also part of post behavioralist approach. Eurocentrism, traditional approach, behavioral approach. Again, political meaning inherent in the term political. It has a wider meaning as such. Explain the philosophical approach to the study of political theory. Okay, philosophical approach and comparative analysis of behavioral and institutional approach. Okay, so let's begin. Political theory. Um, it constitutes systematic reflection on the nature and purpose of government. It seeks to understand both existing political institutions and how they ought to be changed. This was given by Selden S. Wallin. Although this is not the exact statement, I have written the exact statement here. This political theory is not just about politics, it is about envisioning and shaping a better way of life for everyone in community. But I think it is more likely if you, I mean, it is more apt if you write this intro, as it has some jargons, technical jargons, like systematic reflection on nature and purpose of government and other things. Okay, Rajiv Bhargava in his book Political Theory gave three roles of political theory. First is explanatory and interpretative role. It tries to explain political existence, coins different concepts. Second is contemplative role, given by Bhikkhu Parekh also, provides insight into the most general pattern of human practices. Normative role. Third is to endorse and justify an action. For example, liberalism values individual liberty. That's why liberalism justifies an accountable and responsible state and free market economy. Limitations of political theory. Varying interpretation of different theoretical explanation. Uh, so, yeah, limitation of political theory is where there are varying interpretation. Any theoretical explanation has a specific context that is necessary to be uh, known beforehand. Normative role gets into value preferences. So, conclusion, it enables us to comprehend political reality, the causes of conflict and violence in a society in a systematic way. Okay. So, political theory is addition of both political science and political philosophy. Andrew Hacker says every political scientist plays a double role. He is part scientist and part philosopher. So, political theory, as a political science, tries to understand and explain political reality systematically. As a political philosophy, it provides a critical lens to analyze the present political order for identifying lacuna and suggest ways for betterment. For example, Marxism as a political theory, if we take example, Marxism as a science analyzes capitalist system, class conflict, and structural basis of exploitation. But Marxism as a philosophy shares vision about the ideal and classless, stateless society and ways to achieve it. Significance of political theory, given by Dante Germino. Uh, the first is control of social life, to understand social life and solve its problems. Second is social criticism and reconstruction. Third is clarification of concept. Fourth is encouragement to mutual respect and toleration. Andrew Hacker says political theory is never ending conversation among theorists. So that signifies the toleration part of it. Next is evolution of political theory. This is one of the most important page in my notes because it basically covers everything of this chapter. The first is classical political theory, 5th century BC to 15th century BC. It focused on normative questions like what is justice, ideal state, virtuous life. Thinkers were Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, Augustine, Aquinas. Features is teleological thinking. Ethics plus politics is intertwined in their concept. And the third is politics as a means to achieve virtue and divine order. Why it declined? Uh, because it declined because of collapse of feudal order, need to deal with power struggles and religious war, which was not solved by these thinkers, and emerging state system, which was completely a new thing for ancient thinkers. Next is modern political theories. There is 16th to 19th century. The world became fragmented. Feudalism declined, nation-state emerged, religious authority challenged, thinkers sought new foundation for political legitimacy. So the reason for its decline is the reason for its formation. Next is thinkers. Who were the thinkers of modern political theory? The first is Machiavelli. Second is the Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau. This is social contract trio. Mill, Marx. Okay, now the features. Rise of rationalism and humanism, beginning of individual rights. These are the concepts that evolved in this uh, era. Why did it decline? It declined because it was too abstract. Another reason is Eurocentrism. Third is it was disconnected from reality. Post World War and mass democracy needed a new concept. So there was a rise of positivist behavioral political theory, 1920 to 1960, inspired by natural sciences to study politics objectively. Thinkers were Harold Laswell, David Easton, Gabriel Almond, and many more. You will see this later. Features. What were the features? They emphasized on what is and not what ought to be. Use of survey, data, behavior studies, voting. Behavior studies includes voting, elites, interest groups. Then came David Easton's system theory and other theories we will see later in the chapter. Criticism. It ignored value, justice, ethics, and it another criticism is over mechanistic view of humans. Couldn't explain complex moral political phenomena. So, because of these criticism, there was a rise of post-behavioral revolution. It is also called post-behavioral revolution, that is normative revival or contemporary normative theory. So, empirical model was morally empty. That's why it was needed, and world needed guidance, not just analysis. So, these are the things that you can write in intro. Like these are snippets that are we are going to cover in the later in the chapter. Thinker John Rawls, Robert Nozick, Amartya Sen, Martha Nussbaum, communitarians like Sandel. Features: justice, equality, freedom was revisited. Rawls' theory of justice, fairness, not just utility. Sen and Nussbaum, capability approach. So these are the features. Human development beyond GDP was uh, discussed in this post-behavioralist approach. Next is criticism. It didn't address identity, race, gender, colonial legacies, because of which there was a rise of postmodernism, that is, post structural theories, critical theories, also called as post colonial. It contains many subparts, which contains one of the post colonial approaches. It is from 1980s to present. So, expanded who gets to speak and what counts as political. So, this is the topic which is part of that question. As you saw, the concept of political, how it expanded over the time. We'll see about that question also. It challenged great narratives, language, power, and identities shape reality. Thinkers were Michael Foucault, Judith Butler, Edward Said, uh, Habermas, Gramsci. The feature was Power is Everywhere by Foucault, Discourses Shape Truth, Post-structuralism, Identity Matters, Feminist, Post-colonial Thinkers, Deliberative Democracy, Habermas. Today, political theory is pluralist field, drawing from multiple traditions and cultures. So this is apt conclusion, one line conclusion that you can write in any such question. Next is approaches. So as I said, a traditional approach and contemporary approach, and there are two other types of approaches, that is empirical and normative. So first we will see about these broad classification: traditional and contemporary approach. Traditional approach was narrow, contemporary was broad. Traditional was based on formal institution like state governance. Contemporary approach includes gender, race, environment, etc. Methodology for traditional approach is predominantly normative. Contemporary approach includes both. It is not just empirical, it includes both. So, key theorists were Plato, Aristotle, those ancient thinkers. Contemporary approach has John Rawls, Michael Foucault, Habermas, Nancy Fraser, etc. Example of theory: social contract theory, natural rights, sovereignty. In contemporary approach, the deliberative democracy, multiculturalism, environmental political theory. Historical context, often Eurocentric, and contemporary approach reflects a globalized world. Next is critique, criticized for being too abstract, no addressing diversity. Now contemporary approach is criticized for relativism, too broad and fragmented. Application, focused on structural and functions of government and society, applied to a wide range of contemporary issues, global politics, environment, social justice, everything is covered in this. Next is empirical approach. As we have seen, empirical and normative. So empirical approach and normative approach. Empirical approach seeks to discover and describe facts, while normative approach seeks to determine and prescribe value. As you can see, these words are not mere words, these are keywords. See, discover and determine, describe and prescribe. One word can change everything you have written in political science, and that's why I like this subject a lot. Next is focuses on observable, verifiable facts to describe what is. Concerns itself with what ought to be. Methodology uses scientific methods like data collection, statistic analysis, empirical verification. Next, normative approach uses philosophical reasoning, ethical analysis to evaluate political ideas. Next is focus or the nature of inquiry. It is descriptive. Descriptive, that means aiming to discover laws or patterns in political behavior, while prescriptive focuses on moral righteousness of political behavior. Criticism is overlooks value-laden aspect of political phenomena. Leo Strauss said, "Essays on scientific studies of politics." In Leo Strauss, in his book Essays on Scientific Study of Politics, says that it overlooks the value-laden aspect of political phenomena, whereas T.D. Weldon, in his Vocabulary of Politics 1953, criticized normative approach for subjectivity and challenge of providing moral or ethical superiority. As you can see, it is 1953. That means it is from the part of behavioral revolution, and you can connect the dots based on sense, experience and logic. It is based on normative approach is based on speculation and logic. Results of inquiry is verifiable, it is not verifiable, debatable. Next is Robert Dahl's that quote that I said in earlier video also. In politics, refusing to decide is simply deciding to allow others to decide for you. So thus we cannot afford to abstain from acting until a very high level of scientific validity is achieved. So it is basically a criticism of purely empirical approach. He is saying that we cannot wait to tell that this is not scientifically valid and all. In politics, if you don't decide right now, someone else will decide for you. Next is post-war developments brought out the limitation of binary debate. It was realized that the two approaches should not be considered mutually exclusive, resulting in emergence of post-behavioral revolution. So conclusion is very apt in any topic, which in any question which asks you to differentiate between empirical and normative approach. So the next is philosophical approach. We are going to the this traditional approaches. The first traditional approach is philosophical approach. It explores the ethical, moral foundation of politics, justice, rights, and authority. As Vernon van Dijk. Now, this thinker has written a book that is Political Science, a Political Philosophical Analysis, 1960. In this book he has written about all the approaches. So, any approach question, I mean, every year only one question on any one approaches is asked. So, best thing is write this name in any approach that is asked. So, Vernon van Dijk has observed philosophical approach aims to enhance linguistic clarity as language used in description reflects conceptions of reality. So, linguistic clarity is enhanced in philosophical approach. Second is standards of right and wrong is evolved. Next is most classical political theory represents philosophical approaches. Now, philosophical approach is linked to classical political theory. Now, theme. What is the theme? Now, this is what is asked. The question will be a comment on philosophical approach. The first thing is we will be writing this name, this intro. Now we will be stating its objective, like it aims to enhance linguistic clarity as well as standard right and wrong. Next is it is linked with classical political theory. Now the theme. There are four themes. The first is moral reasoning. Now, moral reasoning also keeps on changing. The reasoning aspect of it can always be questioned, and that's why it is subject to change. While moral, some say that morals do not change, but moral aspect of such reasoning can also be questioned based on modern consciousness, as you know, in case of LGBTQ rights. Next is also in the case of Kant's concept of human dignity, which rules out slavery, is closer to modern consciousnness than Aristotle's defense of slavery. Next is human nature. This is also one of the things that philosophical approach deals with. This is now can be examined in the light of contemporary psychology and social science. Third thing that is discussed in philosophical approach is art of government. Earlier it was art of government, which was before Machiavelli. Now this art of government has been converted into grounds of political obligation. Now most of the modern thinkers have been discussing on the grounds of political obligation. On what ground do state have obligation? So like Hobbes, Rousseau and Hegel gave absolutist view of political obligation, while Locke gave postulated rights, and Kant gave human dignity, while J.S. Mill and T.H. Green limits the political obligation by defining condition on state intervention. Now, philosophical approach mainly dwells on the logic behind the grounds and limits of. This is the same thing that was written in the back. Concept of individual right and revolution are byproduct. Now, see, thing is, philosophical approach is to study political theory. Now, political theory contains what? It contains like individual right, revolution, freedom, equality, justice. Now, how are these things based on like this? Just this. If we study how political limits, grounds and limits of political obligation, how will these things go to the concepts of justice, equality, and freedom? So the thing is, first, concepts of individual rights and revolution are byproduct of the debates on which the limits, on what limits should be put on political obligation, whereas conception of freedom, equality, and justice are extension of the theory of rights. So everything is covered. Next is democracy, authoritarianism, and fascism. These are the efforts to translate the concept of individual right into concrete political institutions. So Leo Strauss is the most outstanding of the contemporary champions of philosophical approach. He can also be mentioned. Now, I will tell you what is going to be the conclusion. It is common for all the approaches. We will see. Next is historical approach. Term historical approaches to politics can be used in two senses. So the first sense is, now this is the intro is going to be something like a historical approach is one of the traditional approach, and now you can start with directly with this. It may denote the progress or process of arriving at the laws governing politics through an analysis of historical event. Like you are analyzing a historical event, and then it is leading you to the present law. For example, Karl Popper described this as historicism. Next is historical approach stands for an attempt at understanding politics through historical account of political thought of the past. Now, political thought of the past, if you take historical account of that, that is also a historical approach. So these are the two sense in which historical approach can be used in studying political theory. Example of this is George H. Sabine's A History of Political Theory, in which, according to Sabine, subject matter of political science coincides with the major themes of discussion in the writing of well-known philosophers. So critics point out that it is not possible to understand the idea of past age in terms of contemporary idea and concept. One of the critics' name you should remember, that is David Easton, behavioralist. He warned against living parasitically on ideas a century old and failing to develop a new political synthesis. Now there is a recent revival, that is John Rawls has built his theory of justice by drawing on methodology of Locke and Kant. So basically, John Rawls, what did he do? So he tried to bring historical theories, like he used this approach. Historical approach stands for attempt of understanding politics through historical account of political thought. So historical account of Locke and Kant. Uh, so Rawls took things from there and rejected the utilitarian philosophy of Bentham and Mill. So this is how Locke reached to his theory of justice. Similarly, Herbert Marcuse has built neo-Marxist theory of freedom by reverting to Hegel's concept of civil society, and C.V. Macpherson has built his theory of democracy by reverting to Aristotle and Mill, while rejecting Bentham. Okay, so the next is legal approach. Legal approach stands for, now never been asked, but I think it can be asked. Legal approach stands for an attempt to understand politics in terms of law. It focuses on legal and constitutional framework in which different organs of government has to function. Now this is complete introduction. It inquires into their legal position, power, procedure, which makes their action valid. Now, for example, legal approach to Indian politics will proceed to analyze what? So first is legal implication of provision of constitution. So for example, fundamental right is a provision of the constitution. What are the legal implications of that? But for example, it has legal implication, but DPSP does not have any legal implication. So these are the things that we studied in legal approach. Procedure of formation and legal position of House of Parliament and state legislature. Procedure of election, appointment, power, position. These are the things that we study in legal approach. As Vernon van Dijk observed, see, this name again comes. Both the procedure and the substance of political action at every level is controlled by law. Next, moreover, every political process to become effective and stable must culminate in legal provision, whether it is independent movement or an agitation for civil rights. So these are the historical approaches. One last historical approach traditional approach is institutional approach. Same, Vernon van Dijk. According to Vernon van Dijk, an institution is any persistent system of activities and expectation or any stable pattern of group behavior. Accordingly, upholders of institutional approach proceed to study the organization of functioning of government, its various organs, political parties, and other institutions affecting politics. What are the chief concerns of institutional approach? First is classification of government. That, for example, Aristotle's classification, then modern classification like democracy, parliamentary, presidential, etc. In identification of levels of government, for example, federal, state, and local, as well as branches of government. Composition and powers of each of these. The next is interrelationships. So these are the things that we concern with ourselves when we study the institutional approach. It exemplifies a shift from normative to empirical approach, from historical to contemporary concern within the sphere of traditional approach. However, it relies heavily on description rather than explanation, hence fails to qualify as a contemporary approach. So basically, it is a traditional approach, although it has some features of contemporary approach. Next is drawbacks of institutional approach. It neglects the individual. It neglects the study of international politics. It neglects the role of violence. It neglects the role of various informal groups. Now the conclusion. Now this conclusion can be used in any approach whatsoever. So XYZ approach, in this case institutional approach, is inadequate in itself, but any other approach will also be incomplete without paying due attention to institutions, like without paying due attention to dash dash dash. You can fill anything there. In the present day turmoil, particularly in developing countries. Now this is another way to conclude. I have written this also so that if we don't remember this, this is also something that can be remembered. In the present day turmoil, particularly in developing countries, now here you can write anything about the approach that you have discussed before. In this case it is institutional approach. So for example, in like legal approach, you can write constitution making is the order of the day. Now institution approach, you can write institution building is the order of the day. Dash 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 is the order of the day. So this is what is it is about traditional approach. Now we will be studying about contemporary approach. Okay. Next is behavioral approach. The behavioral approach in political science emerged in mid 20th century as a response to limitations of traditional approach that relied on normative theory and historical analysis. Although found in the works of Graham Wallace, Arthur Bentley, and Harold Laswell, so these are the thinkers that attempted to go on behavioral approach, but it systematically developed only after World War II, particularly through the writings of David B. Truman, Robert Dahl, and David Stern. Now this is just the context. You can write two lines of it, like behavioral approach in political science emerged in mid 20th century through the writings of Graham Wallace, Laswell, Truman, Stern. That's all. Now, behavioralism stood for the shift of focus. Now, if the question is 15 or 20 marks, you have to write this all, if possible. Behavioralism stood for a shift of focus in the study of politics from the formalism and normative orientation of the philosophical schools to political behavior. According to David Stern, the intellectual foundations of behavioralism consist of 8 major tenets. This is something that I have seen in almost every notes that I referred. The first is regularity. Now, discoverable uniformities in political behavior expressed in theory-like statement. Now, how do we go about behavioral approach? The first is regularities. First, we will go through what are the regularities in that in happenings. We will form a theory-like statement. Now, verification. Validity of such theory-like statement. These theory-like statements must be testable, like verifiable. Next is technique. Now this technique is about verification technique, or means for acquiring an interpretation data is also what technique do you use to get these data. Now quantification. It is necessary because precision requires measurement, which should be expressed in terms of actual quantities. Next is values. Behavioralists draw a clear distinction between ethical evaluation and empirical explanation. They insist that objective scientific inquiry has to be value-free. Systematization stands for establishing close interrelationship between theory and research. Pure science understanding and explanation of political behavior is essential to utilize knowledge in the solution of urgent problems of society. Now, next is integration. Signifies the integration of political science with other social sciences like sociology and other social sciences. Next is significance of behavior revolution. What are the significance? First is it marked a major shift away from normative and philosophical approach. It focused instead on empirical and scientific methods. It emphasized the study of observable political behavior. New methodologies introduced like statistical analysis, survey research involves the study of political processes and factors like political socialization, political ideology, political culture, leadership, decision making, political violence, etc. This is the interdisciplinary approach in research. It focused on micro level situations rather than macro level generalization. So this is what behavioralism in political theory is all about. Now, what is decline of behavioralism? It is also the decline. This is the decline of behavioralism. Let's see. Critique of empiricism and quantification, like Leo Strauss in his What is Political Philosophy 1957, heavily emphasized on data, leads to narrow focus. Heavy emphasis on data leads to narrow focus, which leads to overlook of qualitative aspect of political life. Now, Selden S. Walling focus on empirical methods, sidelines important questions about justice and democracy. Now, next is methodological limitation. Surveys and statistics do not capture the full depth of political beliefs, motivation, and action. This was given by Thomas Kuhn. Now, so these are the decline. If behavioralism is asked for 15-20 marks, you can write in explained form. Next is rise of post-behavioralism. Here starts the post-behavioralist approach. Post-behavioralism, in words of David Easton, as a credo of relevance and action, presented a new revolution in political science towards the end of 1960s. It was an effort to overcome the limitations of behavioralism by reviving normative, interpretative understanding and drawing the social sciences closer to problems of society. Example, nuclear threat is a problem in the society, inner conflict. So post-behavioralism tries to bring back the political science into the day-to-day issues of the society. What are the features? First is contextual analysis. It gives the conceptual, not just out of context analysis like behavioralism. Second is normative inclusion. Third is interdisciplinary approach. Fourth is power and structures. It highlights how power imbalances and institutional arrangements shape political outcomes. It must be noted that post-behavioral approach did not mark a complete departure from the behavioral approach. The former sought to make the most of the gains of the latter and apply it to the problem solving. In the word of David Easton, the object of studying a science is not to acquire a set of prescribed information, but to learn a method of inquiry. Next is difference between behavioral approach and post-behavioral approach. Now that we have studied both, we can easily do it without this table, but still I wrote this table just in case I need to go through it once before exam. So behavioral approach, search for pure knowledge and theory. Post-behavioral, search for applied knowledge and practice. And next is behavioral approach, knowledge for knowledge's sake. Now, not no interest in action, but post-behavioral approach is for relevance of knowledge to satisfy social needs and action for problem solving. Focus of study is micro level analysis in behavioral approach. This is macro level. Process of decision making and the content of decision is what is focused in post-behavioralist approach. Behavioral approach is value neutral, while post-behavioral approach is interested in the choice of values. Attitude towards social change, interested in status quo. Behavioralist approach is interested in a status quo, whereas post-behavioralist approach is interested in social change for solving problems. Next is credo of relevance, as asked in the question. It is the core belief of post-behavioralism that political science must be relevant to the real life social political issue. Now that you see these things are being repeated every now and then, it says that political scientists should not live in ivory towers studying politics as dry academic subject. Instead, they must engage with the urgent problems of society like war, racism, poverty, etc. Easton says the discipline must serve the need of society, not just the interest of science. Another thing is credo of relevance is also linked to action science. It is the idea that political science should not only interpret the world as but also help change it. It is a call for practical problem solving and activist approach to research. Next is features. What are the features? There is of the credo of relevance and action of science. Theory is put into practice, intervention oriented, collaborative and democratic. As for example, Martha Nussbaum's capability theory has led to real development strategies in several countries. Okay. Next is post-colonial approach to political theory. Never asked, but I think it is important. It can get asked anytime. Next, first is Eurocentrism and its role. Eurocentrism refers to inclination to consider European cultural values and perspective as universal standards. It plays dual role. First, as a target. Eurocentrism as a target, that is something to be critiqued and dismantled. Eurocentrism has to be critiqued and dismantled. As a motive force, now Eurocentrism is also a motive force as a catalyst pushing post-colonial thinkers to reformulate dominant narratives. Next is post-colonialist theory addresses the legacy of colonialism, including how Eurocentric views have marginalized non-Western perspective. Fourth is by challenging Eurocentrism, post-colonial theory aims to deconstruct the hierarchies and binary oppositions established during the colonial rule. Edward Said's critique of Eurocentrism, that is Orientalism, illustrates how Eurocentrism has shaped the Western perspective of the East, uh, constructing it as other, exotic, backward. Said's analysis show how such representation justified colonial domination. For example, burden, white man burden, you can quote here. Next is Orientalism is a manifestation of Eurocentrism. West defines itself as a norm. Others are measured against this norm found lacking. Like you see in various, uh, uh, there are rankings and indexes that are prepared by Western countries. They try to rank Eastern countries based on those rankings. Next is contributions of Homi K. Bhabha and Gayatri Spivak. Homi K. Bhabha has written The Location of Culture, explores the concept of hybridity, challenges colonized binary and cultural exchange hybrid identities. While Gayatri Spivak, in her Can the Subaltern Speak, has written about how Eurocentrism silences the subaltern voices, importance of listening to and amplifying marginalized voices. Western framework failed to represent powerless. So these are the things. Model of political analysis. This is um, and one question has been asked based on system analysis. So what is the model of political analysis? It is also one of the modern approaches, contemporary approaches in determining of relevant data and evolving their suitable arrangements for yielding an explanation constitute a model of political analysis. First is system analysis, second is structural functional analysis, third is communication theory, fourth is decision making analysis, fifth is Marxist analysis. Um, so first, we are only going to talk about system analysis. Let's see. This is the pioneering model of political analysis by David Easton in his A System Analysis of Political Life, 1965. It conceives politics in terms of political system. Easton defines politics as the authoritative allocation of values which broadly constitutes the political process. Now, this is how he represents the society. This is the political system. So, environment inputs the demands. This demand and support, that is legitimacy, uh, goes into the political system and comes out. Decisions comes out the output. Now decisions and policies go back to the environment, do their work, and some people give the feedback back as support. Like support is what? Like voting. So people demand something. Political system like government does that thing and gives some output. Now if it goes in the environment and people like the output, they will give the positive feedback, like supports the political system, and political system remains. If the policies and decisions do not give the uh, required output, the feedback is negative and the support weakens, and we will see what happens. Okay. Easton has characterized demands as raw material, decision as finished product, support as energy, and feedback as communication process. When there are too many demands, stress will arise and various regulative mechanism will have to be applied. Like demands can need also to be regulated. So a structural mechanism like pressure group will allow only legitimate demands to cross. Cultural mechanism will allow only those demands which are approved by the society. Failure to control the situation may result in revolution or regime change. Now, what is the importance of this approach? First, to conceptualize political system as information processing system, very useful for comparative analysis, used in analysis of international political system. serves as the starting point of Gabriel Almond's model of structural functional analysis, and Carl, like these two things are based on this thing. So, okay, criticism for its inability in understanding the structure and function of political power as well as in analyzing the mass political behavior. In any case, it represents a substantial advance in the direction of constructing a theoretical framework from within the discipline of political science. Next is decline of political theory, one of the penultimate topic of this chapter. Decline of political theory. First is political theory has a long tradition of intellectual effort to attain a systematic knowledge about the goals and methods of politics. However, in mid 20th century, the exponents of new political science began to question the continued relevance of traditional political theory. First is David Easton in his Political System and Inquiry into the State of Political Science, gave that political theory was based on mere speculation, emerged as a product of turmoil that characterized past ages. No outstanding political philosophers after Marx and J.S. Mill. It is failed to acquire suitable tools to account for rise of fascism or communism. Therefore, appealed for building up a behavioral political science and argued that political science should only focus on building causal theories to explain political behavior. Next is Alfred Coben. In his paper The Decline of Political Theory 1953, argued that political theory had lost its relevance in capitalist as well as communist system. Contemporary politics was operating on such a large scale that it could not be analyzed in the light of any partial or narrow theory. For Coben, the logical positivists were also responsible for the decline. Next is Leo Strauss. What is political philosophy? Wrote that new science of politics is a symptom of alleged decline of political theory. By adopting positivist approach, it has ignored the challenges of normative issues. Seymour Martin Lipset, in Political Man, Social Basis of Politics, argued that the values of contemporary society had already been decided. No continued relevance of political theory. Dante Germino, in his Beyond Ideology, argued that in most of the 19th-20th century there was two major causes of decline. The first is rise of positivism, led to craze of science, nature sciences, the prevalence of ideology, culminating in Marxism. So, political theory is neither reductionist behavioral science, that where everything is reduced to sense experience. It is not opinionated ideology which accepts some principle to be true without inquiring into their validity. Now, revival of political theory. Political theory always emerges at a moment of crisis when established designs are called into question. It was given by Nancy Fraser. The resurgence of political theory marks a renewed interest and revitalization of the field after periods of perceived decline. Factors that have contributed to its renewed prominence: first is complex global challenges, second is ethical normative concern. Now, these are some of the thinkers that needs to be uh, given with these concepts. Every point has to be given in a paragraph. Ethical and normative concern was given by Martha Nussbaum. Interdisciplinary engagement was given by Amartya Sen in his Political Economy. Uh, Cultural and identity dynamics resurgence is fueled by discussion on cultural diversity, identity politics, and post-colonial perspective. Now, this has many several subparts in it. Gayatri Spivak examines intersection of colonialism, power, and identity. Carol Pittman and Susan Moller Okin in feminist political theory. Will Kimlicka, cultural pluralism. Franz Fanon, Homi Bhabha, Partha Chatterjee, post-colonialist theory. They have given this thing. Fifth is technology and political discourses. Resurgence is seen in online platforms discussing political theory concept. Re-evolution of historical theories like Harvard Marcuse, Jürgen Habermas have given these theories. Now the conclusion. The resurgence of political theory demonstrates its enduring value in offering critical insights into the complexities of governance, ethics, and social dynamics. As Bhikkhu Parekh sums it up, political theory today is more alive than ever, richer, deeper, and more responsive to the complexities of the world. Now we go to the theories of state. It has many questions on feminist theory of state, post-colonial theory of state, neoliberal perspective of state, pluralist theory, post-colonial colonial theory, pluralist theory, etc. Marxist and liberal approach. Let's go in this topic. Concept of state. J.W. Gardner claimed that political science begins and ends with state. With behavioral revolution, scholars like David Easton suggested to shift the focus from institution to process, that is, from state to politics. But in 19th attention swung back to state as exemplified by Theda Esco in her bringing the state back in 1985. State redefined from institutional structure to active agent of shaping and reshaping society. So this is like the context in which going to study state. First, state is very nice. Then there was a significant line in its relevance, and then it was a broad political science discussion. Max Weber, German sociologist, sought to evolve a sociological definition of state. A state is a human community that claims the monopoly of legitimate use of physical force within a given territory. Elements of state is population, territory, government, sovereignty. So population united by condition of interdependence, common interest, and general set of behavior. Territory Angel in his book notes state comes into existence only when population is settled in a fixed territory. So territory is important. Government. J.W. Gardner. If the state represents an abstract concept, government represent its concrete form. So these are the things that are there. Now the last and the most significant part is sovereignty. Sovereignty denotes the final authority of the state over its population and territory exercised by government of the day. International recognition is only incidental to the sovereignty, not condition of its existence. Now, this is part of my explanation of sovereignty, not very needed, but I just wanted to write so that I get the context of sovereignty. Let's go through it. Meaning, source and limits of sovereignty have evolved historically and philosophically. First, ancient and medical thought that sovereignty is given by divine or moral authority. Next, early modern period thinkers gave the birth to legal political sovereignty like Jan Bodin, first to systematically define sovereignty as absolute, perpetual, and indivisible. Next is Thomas Hobbes, also the social contract theorist. In Leviathan, justified absolute sovereignty derived from social contract. Next is John Locke. Sovereignty rests with people, not ruler. Slowly, the divine source of sovereignty shifted its origin to people. Constitutional limits rights to revolution. Jan Rousseau introduced the popular sovereignty, that is general will. Now, legal sovereignty. This is Austin's positivist theory. This is one of the most important theory of sovereignty. It is also called as monistic theory, single source of all positive law. State. John Austin, in his book Province of Jurisprudence, determined 1832, defined sovereignty as the commanding authority to whom people habitually obey. Ignored morality and custom or popular will. Sovereign is above law, not bound by it. The significance is it separates law from morality, views the state as a legal entity, not moral or ethical. Influenced later thinkers like Hans Kelsen, H.L.A. Hart. Next is pluralist critique of that sovereignty. monistic theory emerged to resolve the confusion of medieval age, but its negative consequence is that there is potential to convert state into totalitarian. It is harmful for international peace. So, pluralist critics like Harold Lasky, G.D.H. Cole, MacIver gave the theory of pluralist state. We'll see about it. The discovery of sovereign in Austinian sense is impossible misadventure. This is given by Harold Lasky. Um, as G.D.H. Cole gave the functionalist view of sovereignty, MacIver gave the extreme pluralist, that is, state is both the child and guardian of law. They argued that sovereignty is not absolute or indivisible. Power is diffused among multiple associations. State is only one association among many, given by MacIver. Now, postmodernists like Michael Foucault, power is diffused through knowledge and discourses, not just legal authority like Austin. The Parth Chatterjee, colonial and post-colonial state experience derivative sovereignty, that is externally shaped. Challenges to state sovereignty. What are the challenges? This is also one of the POIQs. In the evolving landscape of the modern world, the traditional Westphalian system of state sovereignty encounters a host of challenges. First is transnational and supranational forces, like given by Robert Cohen and Joseph Nye. Those were the proponents of neoliberal institutionalism, uh, like MNCs and the UN. Next is cosmopolitanism. Martha Nussbaum argued for shift from narrow state intervention to global responsibility. Third is globalization and deterritorialization, like Arjun Appadurai highlighted how global flow of info, culture, and finance influence state sovereignty. Like, for example, cyber war and challenges of regulating digital realm is impacting the sovereignty of the state nowadays. These are things that are relevant nowadays. So I think these are going to be asked in near future. Neocolonialism by Kwame Nkrumah. Uh, it continued. He said that continued economic exploitation affects sovereignty. For example, because of these continued economic exploitation, there is military coups in Africa every other day, and you have read about the OAU, Organization of African Union, and how they keep on withdrawing from that organization, as it represents one of the neo-colonialist institution. Fifth is impact of power blocks, like when there is US-China rivalry, there is very least you can do about sovereignty. Subnational challenges, uh, given by Will Kymlicka and Ellen Bukharin. For example, multiculturalism and secessionist movements also leads to sovereignty challenges. Next is relation between globalization and sovereignty of the state. Marcel McLuhan has said that globalization has led to borderless world. Three school of thought in this context, that is relation between globalization and sovereignty of the state. First is globalist school of thought, given by Susan Strange. He says that state has declined because of globalization. Second is, now you can explain it later. Second is anti-declinist, that is Robert Gilpin. State is in command of globalization. Third is transformationalist, that is David Held. Sovereignty and globalization not a zero sum game. So these are the three major points. These are the keywords that we need to put. So conclusion is by Sorensen. Globalization has not impacted all states in equal manner. Some have become stronger, like India and China. Some have become weaker, like Pakistan, Sri Lanka. Hence, no simplistic answer to the question. Therefore, globalization itself is a dynamic. Since COVID, globalization is losing and state is winning. For example, as you can see nowadays, Trump's tariff war and many things shows the mark of de-globalization in the current scenario. Next is liberal theory of state. Liberal theory of state concerns on individual freedom, limited government, and rule of law. Uh, Its first is individual right and freedom. Liberalism is built on the premise that individual is prior to the state. John Locke advocated for natural right. J.S. Mill, in his book On Liberty, emphasized on freedom of thought and expression. Friedrich Hayek, in his book Road to Serfdom, excessive state control erodes liberty. These are the theories that we can quote in between our answers. Second is limited government. Liberal theories insists on constitutional limits to state power. Locke's true treatise of government advances the idea of government by consent and accountability. So, therefore limiting the government. Hayek championed a free market and minimal state intervention, therefore limiting the government in market. Third is rule of law. Liberal principle is that everyone, including the state, is subject to law. A.V. Dicey has given this rule of law. Defined rule of law as ensuring legal equality and protection from arbitrary power. The state and social contract. Liberalism acknowledges the necessity of state, but only as a product of rational consent. Therefore, there was a rise of social contract theory by Locke, Hobbes, and Rousseau, etc. Individuals surrender some freedom to state in exchange for protection and order. This lays the basis of liberal constitutionalism. Now, the conclusion. The liberal state is a proactive procedural entity meant to enable individual flourishing by upholding rights, laws, and minimal coercion. Its enduring relevance lies in balancing freedom and authority through democratic consent and legal restraint. Next is classical liberal perspective. Now, first was liberal perspective state. Now, it has two subparts. Now, these things need to be included there, but if there is a question separately on classical perspective state, you should have something to write about. Classical liberalism emerging as a response to medieval feudalism, etc., etc. Adam Smith, in his The Wealth of Nations, gave the concept of laissez-faire economics. Individual self-interest, when left free, leads to collective prosperity through the invisible hand of the market. Next is in this concept also he has given this very famous quote that it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, but from their regard or to their own interest that we get food. Next is philosophical extension of classical liberalism. There was utilitarianism and radicalism given by Jeremy Bentham and J.S. Mill. Contemporary relevance, there is debate on personal freedom and state control and various things like surveillance and all that can be mentioned in this answer. Next is classical liberalism as negative liberalism. So freedom class as a negative liberalism, classical liberalism emphasizes on freedom from state intervention rather than freedom to access goods and opportunities. Uh, their core tenet is state is a necessary evil given by Thomas Paine. Where there is no law, there is no freedom, etc. Next is essence of negative liberalism is freedom and non-interference, market rationality and individual responsibility, a skepticism of state power given by Hayek. Fourth is social policy, that is survival of the fittest, Herbert Spencer. Classical liberalism remains a cornerstone of liberal political thought. Its enduring influence continues to shape debates on state power, personal responsibility, and public policy in modern democracy. Now, positive liberalism, that is welfare state, given by T.H. Green, Barker, and all. Positive liberalism emerged in the response of ethical failures of socio-economic inequalities of negative liberalism. By 19th century, thinkers recognized that freedom required not just absence of restraint but enabling condition for self-development. So, Rise and Rational scholars like Ruskin, Dickens, Robert Owen exposed the moral shortcomings of negative liberalism. Second is social welfare, individual well-being. Liberty must align with common good from individualism to social responsibility. Third is expanding liberty, expanding liberty and equality, both. First, positive liberals argued that true liberty requires opportunity. Equality now includes economic justice through measures like progressive taxation, wealth redistribution, etc. Positive freedom and enabling state. T.S. Green defined liberty as capacity for self-realization. Similarly, Amartya Sen, through his capability approach, linked freedom to human development. For example, affirmative action policies in India and US, the state as a moral agent. Harold Lasky envisioned the state as an instrument of human perfection through public services. MacIver introduced the idea of service state, where legitimacy comes from performance. And the last is contemporary relevance. For example, reservation is part of positive theory of liberty, surveillance and privacy debate. Conclusion: the shift from negative to positive liberalism redefined the state as an enabler of freedom and equity. While this led to the welfare state, its economic sustainability was questioned in the late 20th century, paving the way for neoliberal critique, advocating a return to minimalist state intervention, rolling back of state. So, first there was very like significance of a state in ancient political theory. Then there was in behavioral revolution there was decline of state. Then came the revival of state, bringing the state back in, as we saw. And the last after the state came back and the positive liberalist theory gave some concepts. Then there is another neoliberal critic that goes on saying that the state should roll back. Okay. Next is wait. Is there anything? Yeah, neoliberal perspective of state. It is also called as Manmohanomics, Thatcherism, Reaganism, etc. Also can be considered as Washington consensus. So, neoliberal perspective of state is based on the tenets of limited state and a free market, combining the monetarism of Milton Friedman and economic liberalism of Friedrich Hayek. Uh, Friedrich Hayek is also called as father of neoliberalism. First is limited government intervention. F. A. Hayek, in his Road to Serfdom, argues that maximalist state has resulted into excessive dependence on individuals on state and loss of initiative. Mm, Second is free market capitalism. Markets are seen as self-regulating systems that allocate resources efficiently through voluntary exchange and competition. Milton Friedman says the great virtue of free market system is that it does not care what color people are. It only cares whether they can produce something you want to buy. Uh, for example, Hong Kong's low tax economy. Third is individual autonomy. Neoliberal prioritizes the individual as a rational actor. For example, Robert Nozick gives that individuals have rights and there are things no person or group may do to them. Uh, for example, rise of Bitcoin. Fourth is protection of property rights. Foundation of functioning the market economy. TRIPS agreement. Um, Minimal state and non-redistribution. Neoliberalism opposes redistributive justice and socio-engineering. Some say that it is forced labor. Okay. Thus, neoliberal perspective advocates a delegated governance model based on the principle of minimum government, maximum governance. Such a model relies on the involvement of societal actors, thus caused a blurring of the public and private and led to the horizontal diffusion of power of state to market forces and new structure of local government. So what are the critical evaluations of neoliberal theory of state? First is income inequality, weakening social safety nets, finan- financial crisis, erosion of public service, environment harm, market failures, and decline in social cohesion. Conclusion is neoliberalism became hegemonic idea in 1990s. However, it started facing challenges. Since 2008 financial crisis, neoliberalism is facing a crisis of legitimacy. So neoliberalism is also declining. Next is state-society relationship. This is not that important how state is linked to society. Chicago School of Thought emphasized on the need of greater individual participation in the formation of civil society. Frederick Hayek and Milton Friedman believed in limited intervention by the state, only undertake non-coercive service function. Um, Now, evolution of new lexicon in past few decades, for example, good governance, fiscal prudence, outsourcing, philanthrocapitalism, etc. The civil society began to take up the functional state space vacated by state. So state is basically declining, and these things are leading to civil societies getting those space. Such an upsurge of civil society has also led to the emergence of powerful pressure groups and powerful transnational corporations with the ability to shape public policy and mold civil societies to their benefits. However, a vibrant and stable liberal democracy demands transparent conversation between state and civil society. This is like the conclusion. Mm, when this direct channel is broken, there is movements like Occupy Wall Street movement, anti-corruption movement, Yellow Vest movement, etc. Next is Marxist perspective. Rooted in the works of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, the Marxist theory views state as historical product of class struggle, fundamentally designed to preserve the interest of ruling capitalist class. So, the origin and class function of state. The state emerges when private property and class divisions arise. It exists to manage and stabilize capitalist class relation. Karl Marx says that the state is excessive committee of bourgeois, executive committee of bourgeois. Second is ideological role and false consciousness. The state also functions as an ideological apparatus, promoting a ruling class ideology through media, education, and culture to legitimize capitalist order. For example, Louis Althusser says that the state is like a machine of repression to subject the working class to surplus value extortion. Relative autonomy of state also very important. Though rooted in capitalist interest, the state can exercise relative autonomy, responding to social pressure and class struggle. Basically, social pressure and class struggle can lead to state exercising its autonomy against the capitalists. There is an important debate uh, in terms of Nikos Polonza and Ralph Miliband. Polonza say the state has a relative autonomy in relation to class forces, and Ralph Miliband says the state relative autonomy is constantly contested. For example, minimum wage legislation under the working class pressure and social welfare during the period of unrest. Withering away of state. Transition to communism. In Marxist theory, the state is temporary instrument during the transition from capitalism to communism. So, Marxism says that right now we are in capitalism. What we need is a revolution. There will be a small phase of socialism, and then we will completely turn into communism. In communism, there will be no state. So, this is what it is saying. Critique of Marxist perspective. There are many critics. First is economic reductionism and narrow power lens. Max Weber criticizes Marx for reducing state to economic instrument, overlooking its legitimacy and autonomous institutional logic. C. Wright Mills says that Marxism narrowly equates economic ownership with power, ignoring influence of non-economic elites like military. Second is feminist critic. Feminist says that exclusive focus on class while ignoring patriarchal structure perpetuated by state. Post-structuralist like Michael Foucault says that power is diffused, not just economic or centralized. Neo-Marxist revision. Gramsci says that state as instrument of ideological hegemony. Next is critical evaluation. First, strength of Marxist analysis, class-based analysis. Second is historical materialism. Third is class struggle. Weakness is authoritarianism tendency, globalization challenges given by David Harvey, and functional complexities of modern world. Herbert Marcuse says that the liberation of man is not possible except through revolution. And welfare state often egalitarian uh, policies. Welfare state offers egalitarian policies within capitalist framework. So this leads to Marxism getting weaker. Ambiguity of revolutionary means Cuban Revolution. Okay, so the conclusion is Marx's theory of state remains foundational in critiquing capitalist power structure and highlighting class dynamics. However, its determinism, neglect of non-economic factors, and challenges in application limits its explanatory power in 21st century. Reinterpretation by neo-Marxists make it evolving framework rather than a closed doctrine. Okay. Next is post-colonialist perspective of state. Post-colonialist perspective denotes an attempt to analyze the problems of the newly independent nations, particularly against the background of their relation with colonial and neo-colonial powers. Frantz Fanon says that the history of all developing countries is a history of decolonization. Champions of colonialism claimed that they were fulfilling the noble responsibility of extending the benefits of civilization to primitive people, as exemplified in the notion of white man's burden. This view, containing various theoretical approaches such as liberal, modernist, Marxist, neo-Marxist, feminist. Okay, the first is liberal modernist perspective. According to this view, state is an instrument of modernization. Modernization theorists in 50s 60s treated post-colonial state as principal tool in transforming the backward underdeveloped society along progressive lines. Post-colonial countries will prosper if they undergo modernization and integrate with international economy. So this is what liberal modernist perspective had to say. Gunnar Myrdal in Asian drama has used the concept of soft state to describe India. Indian state is unable to implement laws as it is soft on lawbreakers. F. W. Riggs uses the term prismatic societies for societies in transition, moving towards modernization. Samuel P. Huntington mentions that political modernization does not necessarily lead to democratization owing to political decay. Therefore, economic modernization should be supported. Next is political cultural approach given by Gabriel Almond and Sidney Verba. And the next is structural functional approach, highlights the role of leadership in the post-colonial states in nation building. The post-colonial state took on itself the task of building institutions like a bureaucratic system, political parties, election system, and legislative bodies. Thus, in post-colonial societies, state has been an important factor for for building the nation. Next is second is Marxist perspective of post-colonial theories. In Marxist perspective, there are two theories. There are two schools. First is dependency school. Second is structuralist. Dependency school, given by A.G. Frank, Samir Amin, and Emmanuel Wallerstein. Economic dependency of post-colonial state in the context of international capitalism focuses on trade rather than production. Trade leading to unequal exchanges between core and periphery, and this leads to development of underdevelopment. Development of underdevelopment. So this dependency school says that former colonialism has ended, but neocolonialism is continuing. State in these societies are uh, clientist states, like puppet state. They are puppets of the metropolitan bourgeois. These states are not working in the interest of their own people. They are working in the interest of bourgeois class of metropolis. Hence, it is resulting in development of underdeveloped. So, either you write this or you write this, reading leading to the same conclusion. It suggests the only way to achieve development is by delinking themselves from international economy and focusing on national autonomous development. So this is the dependency school. Next is Marxist structuralism. um, given by Hamza Alvi. Also, it has been asked before. Hamza Alvi in his The State is Not State in Post-Colonial Societies, Pakistan and Bangladesh, 1972, gave the concept of overdeveloped state. This approach has significantly contributed to the discourse on the state by highlighting the relative autonomy of the state. So this is also part of relative autonomy of the state, similar to what we have seen in Marxist theory. uh, there was a discussion between uh, uh, those two. Okay, okay. Next is Hamza Alvi pointed out the mismatch in economic and political structure. So Hamza Alvi, what he said, that there is a economic structure is different, political structure is different. Now, economy remaining traditional. So what happened after colonialism is, because of colonialism, political structure developed quite a lot because of constitution, and for example, in India, uh, and Government of India Act 1935 and several reforms led to a very high level of political structure in India, while the economic structure was completely fragmented, fractured. There was no basis for economics, so there was a disbalance. That's why it was called as overdeveloped state. Economy remaining traditional while state is modern. State itself is powerful entity and bargains with classes. Post-colonial state inherits a powerful bureaucratic military apparatus. So this is what we were talking about as political overdeveloped state, and mechanism of government from colonial masters that allow to subjugate all the native class. There are multiple classes within the indigenous bourgeois that attempt to control the state apparatus. For example, military bureaucratic oligarchies. A complex class relationship develops between native metropolitan bourgeois and the neo-colonialist bourgeois, wherein the foreign capitalist, that is neo-colonialist bourgeois, are able to control the weak bourgeois at the periphery. Conclusion. Thus, the Marxist perspective analyzes the class character of post-colonial state and underscores the relative autonomy enjoyed by it. Third is feminist perspective on post-colonial state, put forth by scholars like Sania Alvarez, Shirin Rai, Rajeshwari Sundar Rajan, analyzes the gendered state processes in the post-colonial state, the implication for women, and strategies for realizing gender justice. So these are going to be reflected in single line. Now comes another theory of state after post-colonialist theory of state. This is pluralist theory of state, given by Lasky, Figgins, Ernest Barker, G.D.H. Cole, Lindsay, etc., Dugoit, McIver, Dahl, etc. Because society is federal, the authority must also be federal. The above statement was made by Harold Lasky, asserting that state is only one of the social institutions and it should not lay claim to absolute power over other institutions. Pluralist perspective portrays the state as a mechanism designed to serve the interest of various groups simultaneously. It has descriptive as well as normative overtones. On descriptive side, it deals with working on democratic state in contemporary world. On normative side, it prescribes to rectify any undue prominence of one or some influential section at expense of others. State must act as an impartial arbiter between the claims of several social groups. Furthermore, it must justify its authority by proving to be the guardian of justice in society. Only a democratic state which allows freedom of association is capable of evolving into pluralist state. So, starts why this statement is there, because democratic statement is the one which gives the right to form association. Now this right gives the citizen independent form in citizens form independent associations to pursue larger interest of community. These associations become powerful enough to counterbalance the power of the state. Next is contemporary concept of political state was evolved in a different direction. Robert Dahl and Charles Lindbaum's Ethics, Economics and Welfare in 1953 and Dahl's Who Governs are regarded as landmarks in the evolution of theory of pluralist state. They tried to demonstrate that democratic society was marked by a widespread distribution of political uh, resources and that different interests prevailed in different political disputes and at different times. Dahl and Lindblom describe their model of working democracy as polyarchy. The role of government in such a situation is little more than that of an honest broker in the middle. Criticism of pluralist theory. It is being too expectant about state and government. State cannot act as a truthful broker, as it is impossible to govern without using power and favor to powerful groups. If sovereignty is divided among various associations, it will lead to devastation of sovereignty. As a result, chaos will prevail in the society. There will be turmoil. The concept of pluralist state implies that all groups would bargain on equal footing, while in practice, Lindbaum in his book later work admitted that business and property enjoyed a privileged position in market-dominated polyarchies in the West. Even Dahl, in Dilemmas of Pluralist Democracy, conceded pluralism cannot be treated as an open competition between truly equal forces. Thus, it does not sufficiently account for the power asymmetry among the interest groups. Despite criticism, pluralism continues to influence the political discourse in the form of concepts such as multiculturalism and radical democracy. Okay, next is feminist theory of state. The feminist theory of state broadly has used the prism of patriarchy and historical nature of injustice against women to make a sense of nature and role of state. Feminist theory critiques the state as a gendered institution that systematically legitimizes and reproduces patriarchal power. Core assumption of this theory of state is the state reflects patriarchy. Laws and institutions often reinforce male dominance. For example, Hindu Succession Act before 2005 amendment privileged male heirs. Second is gender is political. State policies construct and reinforce gender roles. Maternity leave without adequate paternity provision perpetuates the caregiving in is women's responsibility. Third is the personal is political. Carol Hannis issues like domestic violence, marital rape, reproductive rights are shaped by state policies and law, not merely private matters. Fourth is the state is non-monolithic. Feminists analyze how various institutions like law, military, welfare differently impact women, emphasizing institutional complexity over single state logic. Different stream of feminism. So there are liberal feminism, welfare state, radical feminism, Marxist feminism, post-structuralist. First, we will go about liberal feminist theory of state, given by Betty Friedan and Susan Muller Hawkins. These are the things that I have written from Subramanian's notes. Liberal feminist conceptualizes state as a neutral arbiter historically dominated by men, but they argued that it could be captured back from the influence of men uh, through increased participation of women. So they are talking about capturing back of state from women, influence of men. Next is Marxist feminist theory. According to them, the nature of state is capitalist, perpetuating the class rule and in turn subordination of women more than institution. State is form of social relation. State treats women as household laborers for which they are not paid, and they are also treated as producer of next generation of laborers. Women's subordination played a role in sustaining capitalism. Zilla uh, Einstein, that is, gives capitalist patriarchy. Uh, Nature of state is both patriarchal as well as capitalist. Capitalist class structure and hierarchical sexual dichotomy reinforces each other. Next is radical feminist theory given by Kate Millett in her Sexual Politics, and Catherine McKinnon towards a feminist theory of state. Disillusioned with liberal feminist politics, they had far more critical view of state as patriarchal. Sexual politics was an integral part of the state. Radical feminists extended their focus from only institutional to wider structures of the state and society. Radical feminists did not concern themselves with reforming the state, but instead on developing an extra static form of politics. For example, civil society. So this is the difference between radical and liberal. Liberals were trying to capture the state and do the sufficient adjustment from inside, whereas radical feminist theory of state goes on the external influence on state and trying to influence its decision based on civil societies in the form of civil society. Catherine McKinnon says that the state is a male in feminist sense. The law sees and treats women the way men see and treat women. Women friendly welfare state. This is the fourth one. Towards the end of 1980s, Anglo-American perspective were challenged from outside. Nordic feminists say, like Helga Maria Harness says that state is women friendly and provides ample opportunity to work within its structure. Democrats in Australia, uh, uh, they also were of the positive social changes of the state. Third is gender and development scholars. They gave the economic modernization with the help of state is rather more important. And the last one is political post-structuralist feminist theory of state. First, in this one, there are two school of thought. The first is rejection of state, Ellen Amy. It is best not to theorize state because state is too abstract to address the diversity concerns of feminists. The second is discursive state. Davina Cooper shifted their focus from the superficial study of state institution to the micro practices of the state. Post-structuralists destabilize the in and out debate and conclude that state could be both positive as well as negative resources for the feminist. Thus, feminist theory contributed to the analysis of state by subjugating it to staunch critique from gender perspective and underlining subtle forms and structure of power in patriarchal ecology. Okay. Next is justice. Justice theory, there are many different questions. We'll be going through this topic now. Okay. As you can see, the question is on original position, communitarian critique, and all. We will discuss about these questions. Justice is the first virtue of social institution given by John Rawls. Justice is the most fundamental and contested concept in political philosophy. At its core, justice reflects to fair and equitable distribution of rights, resources, and opportunities and responsibilities within society. So, this is one of the definitions of justice, and this is the quote that you're going to start with. Any question that is related to justice. Then there is a scope of justice. Justice is relevant only in an open society. In a situation of scarcity, not relevant in purely authoritarian or purely competitive or purely communist regimes. So, justice can only be relevant in open society when their people can put their demand and there is scarcity of things. Then only there is a issue of distributive justice. Next is philosophical context. Justice is primarily a problem of discovering right course of action. While good and bad constitute a continuum, right and wrong are mutually exclusive categories. Justice as a dynamic idea. The term justice implies the quality of being just, right, or reasonable. This embodies an ideal which is akin to the absolute truth. Yet it is dynamic idea because it depends upon the development of our prevalent social consciousness. For example, slavery, untouchability, etc. D.D. Raphael, in his Problems of Political Philosophy, calls it as modern consciousness. It is an ever-growing phenomenon. Relation between liberty, equality, and justice. Ernest Barker, in his Principle of Social and Political Theory 1951, has shown that justice represents a synthesis of principle of liberty, equality, and fraternity. In Principle of Justice, we seek to regulate human relation in society by the principle of liberty, but liberty is qualified by the principle of equality, and equality is further qualified by the principle of fraternity. So this is how these things are related. Now you can explain it in one page and it will be done. Next is differentiate between traditional and modern concept of justice. uh, First is traditional concept of justice has focused on just man, primarily concerned with virtues befitting a man for enhancing his own moral worth, necessary for creating harmony in society and ideal state. While modern idea of justice emphasized on a just society from the individual's perspective, justice implies fair treatment of each individual. That is social justice. Modern justice leads to social justice. So modern justice gives the idea of just society. Traditional justice gives the idea of just man. Traditional concept of justice. Sorry, there was a call. Second is traditional concept of justice operates under assumption that it knows what is best for each individual in the society, making it a rather paternalistic prescription, while modern notion seeks to explore what is the best for each individual in society. Okay. Third is traditional concept of justice is seen as a limited concept, while a modern concept of justice is much broader and entails the right of each individual to be justly treated instead of focusing on his duty. Fourth is modern concept of justice has been diversified to include legal, political, and socio-economic justice absent in traditional approach. Therefore, ancient conception is often labeled as conservative, while modern conception of justice is progressive. It is for this reason that in contemporary times justice encompasses and challenges established practices, norms such as patriarchy and caste inequality, something that was impossible under status quoist traditional concept of justice. Next is dimension of justice. When modern idea of justice is applied to various aspects of social life, we get legal, political, and other dimension of justice. First is legal justice. Alf Ross, in his book on Law and Justice, argued that justice consists of an efficient administration of law, and that it should not be tested on some imaginary moral value. Second is Ernst Barker, principle in his book Principle of Social and Political Theory, points out that ideally law ought to have both validity and value, so people follow it legally as well as morally. So there are two. These are the two discussions in terms of legal justice. First is justice according to law, and second is law according to justice. Second one is more powerful in this one. Second is political justice. So wait. So this is procedural justice and this is substantive justice. Basically, in a case, political justice. Use of political justice refers to transformation of political institution, political process, and political rights according to concurrent conception of justice. Uh, that is democratic institution, independence of judiciary, rule of law, and guarantee of liberty and thought of expression leads to constitutional government. Third is socio-economic justice. Social justice, in wider sense, implies a reordering of social life in such a manner that the material and moral benefit of such social effort are not cornered by tiny privileged class, but accrued to masses to ensure their upliftment of the lower, weaker, and underprivileged section. It involves a logical synthesis of liberty, equality, and fraternity. For example, the Indian Constitution, particularly Preamble TPSP, is committed to the ideal of justice, social, economic, and political. Okay. Now, next is the difference between procedural and substantive theory. The procedural theory of justice and substantive theory of justice are two different approaches towards the idea of justice. They differ in both what constitutes justice as well as how to achieve it. Okay, what constitutes justice and how to achieve it. Procedural theory of justice gives primacy to procedure adopted for allocation of primary goods in society, treating the allocation itself as secondary, while substantive theory of justice lays greater emphasis on the allocation itself, making the procedure of allocation merely means towards just allocation. This difference is rooted in the fact that procedural theory is based on tenets of liberalism, while substantive theory of justice is based on the principle of socialism. Procedural theory of justice treats individuals as autonomous entities who must be free to pursue their own goals in open market driven economy. Norman Barry compares it to a fair rule based race, while substantive theory of justice views the society as a whole working towards a common goal of achieving greater equality, hence focuses on final outcome of procedure instead of procedure itself. Next is in attaining these goals, the two theory of justice views the role of the state differently. Procedural theory of justice is against any state intervention and instead relies on the market mechanisms to ensure just distribution, whereas substantive theory expects the state intervention to ensure that the fortune of one is not at the cost of misfortune of other in the society. The best example of procedural theory are Robert Nozick and Milton Friedman. Substantive theory examples are John Rawls and Amartya Sen. Next is difference between retributive and distributive justice. Now, this is not the difference between them. Retributive justice is just this much, that is, retributive justice, according to David Miller, requires that punishment should be awarded for a crime duly proved in proportion to the seriousness of the crime, should neither be too severe nor too lax. Second is distributive justice. Now, distributive justice is something that has been asked before and it is something that we need to prepare better. Distributive justice is David Miller in Social Justice 1976 has defined the problems of social justice as that of determining the principles that should be chosen to govern the distribution of resources. He has identified three criteria which are usually invoked to determine the principles of distributive justice. The first criteria is protection of acknowledged rights, that is luck. And David Hume creates a classical hierarchical order. In this system, people have different ranks depending on how important they are. For example, Aristotle's defense of slavery, defenders of Hindu caste system. It is impossible to attain social justice in this case, so as long we adhere to this principle. Next is distribution according to desert, given by Herbert Spencer. It creates a market system, although it rules out privileges based on birth and determines one's share of social benefits based on one's contribution to social goods. However, it concedes vast income and wealth disparity. Competition leads to widen the gap between rich and poor. So Herbert Spencer sought to apply the role of survival of the fittest in social life. Next is distribution according to needs, given by Peter Kropotkin. Creates solidarity community is quite laudable, but it's possible only if there is abundance of goods and services. That's why it is hypothetical. If this principle is applied in a society situation, it will kill initiative and discourage talented and energetic people from giving their best to the society. The solution to the problems can reasonably be found in a judicious combination of the third and second principle. That is, states should make provision for meeting the minimum needs of the people. Thereafter, rewards of each individual should be determined according to his contribution to social goods. Next is diverse perspectives on justice. So, there are diverse perspectives like liberal, libertarian, Marxist, feminist, communitarian. Liberal perspective treats liberty as the central problems of justice. This perspective is chiefly represented by Rawls' theory of justice, Rawls' theory of justice um, in reoriented the liberal political thought by framing justice as fairness. Rawls pointed out that justice is the first virtue of good society. The problem of justice consists in ensuring a just distribution of primary goods. He has attacked utilitarianism because, in the greatest happiness of greatest number, it does not care if it leads to extreme hardship of any particular individual. Rawls has evolved a unique methodology for arriving at a unanimous procedure of justice. Following the tradition of social contract, Rawls has envisaged an original position by abstracting the individuals from their particular social and economic circumstances. These individuals are symbolically placed behind a veil of ignorance, deliberating as rational agents. According to Rawls, in such state of uncertainty, the rational negotiators will choose the least dangerous path by hypothetically placing themselves in least advantageous position. This will result in three principles of justice. First is principle of equal liberty. Nobody's liberty will be compromised for any other's benefit. Second is sometimes it is not included. Sometimes it is said as there are only two principles of justice. So the second one is principle of fair equality of opportunity, particularly for acquiring offices and position. And the third is difference principle. Any departure from equal distribution of primary goods can be justified only if it benefits the least advantage. These are the three democratic equality principles of Rawls. Here, Rawls introduced the idea of chain connection. That is, in order to strengthen a chain, we should start with strengthening its weakest link and then repeat the process. Criticism. Collectivists argue that he has discovered the ground for justification of existing capitalist system. Marxists contend that any deliberation without knowledge of prevailing social economic condition uh, is meaningless. Libertarian argued that Rawls has sacrificed liberty for the sake of equality. Fourth is communitarians argued Rawls' abstract individualism ignored the social embeddedness of individuals and communal sources of identity, value, and justice. Feminists: the family is not a real realm of justice in Rawls' account, and this omission makes the whole theory incomplete. Susan Moller-Oakins. Okay. Next is Rawls' theory of justice represent a convergence of libertarianism and egalitarianism and communitarianism. Rawls is a libertarianism because his conception of men negotiating in the original position emphasizes those who are trying to maximize their own self-interest. This conforms to the libertarian point of view. Secondly, his first principle of justice accords priority to liberty, which cannot be compromised for any other benefit. Second is egalitarianism. Rawls is an egalitarian because he concedes equal liberty for all. Further, he insists that socio-economic inequality can be allowed only if they satisfy the condition for fair equality of opportunity for all. That is difference principle and benefit to least advantage. Principle of chain connection. This is the communitarianism of Rawls. More meritorious enjoy the benefit of their merit in association with the less meritorious lot. A chain is no stronger than its weakest link. This idea brings Rawls very close to the image of communitarian. Thus, Rawls has discovered a method of making procedural justice an instrument of meeting the requirement of substantive justice. This is the crux of this all. Next is contractual aspect of Rawls' theory of justice. Unlike classical theorists like Hobbes' Locke, who focused on the origin of political authority and state, Rawls primarily concerned with the moral principle that would govern to just society. To this end, Rawls introduces two central thought experiments. The first is original position. Now, any question about original position, you have to write this, and then this, and then this. Any question on veil of ignorance, you have to write this, you have to write this in short, and then this. So, original position. Rawls imagines hypothetical choice situation called original position. It corresponds to state of nature in traditional contract theories. It is a position of status quo in which all people are treated equal. These individuals are given two tasks. First is to choose principles that are to govern the basic structure of society, and the second is to choose the principles that are to apply to individuals. Rawls does this because usually people are prevented from upholding just principle as they are guided by their selfish interest. A number of unfair factors influence agreements. Unfair beginning advantages, threat of force of coercion, fraud. In order to ensure that the choice of principle of justice is impartial and fair, Rawls invokes the constraints of veil of ignorance. The Rawls places all individual abstracted from their socio-economic condition behind veil of ignorance. Individuals behind this veil are unaware of who they are and what their interests, skill, needs are. In Rawls' original position, these people would have elementary knowledge of economics, psychology, and have a sense of justice. They would be interested in maximizing the primary good, that is liberty, opportunity, income, wealth, dignity, self-respect. Rawls assumes these hypothetical people would be conservative, risk taker, and in a situation of uncertainty would opt for least advantageous outcome. Okay. The next is the distributive aspect of Rawls justice. The distributive aspect of Rawls justice addresses the allocation of goods, rights, and opportunity in society. Rawls articulates principle of justice. First is equal two principle of justice. Although I have written three earlier, this there it is true. The first is equal liberties principle. Each person is to have an equal right to the most extensive set of basic liberties compatible with the similar liberties of others. Second is difference principle. Socio-economic inequalities are to be arranged so that they are to the greatest benefit to the least advantage. The inequalities must be attached to offices and positions open to all under conditions of fair equality of opportunity. Now, Rawls' distributive of justice is not about equalizing wealth, but about ensuring that any existing inequality enhance the condition of the worse off and do not violate fairness in access to opportunity. C.B. Macpherson argues that Rawls' emphasis on equality is not substantial enough because he defends inequalities arising out of institution of family and accepts the inevitability of class division based on income and wealth. Nonetheless, the fact cannot be denied that Rawls has attempted to provide for democratic equality which surpasses the limits of a formal and liberal notion of equality. Communitarian critique of Rawls' theory of justice. Very important topic. Rawlsian theory derives its principle of justice. Now, this is the crux of Rawls' theory of justice. The Rawlsian theory derives its principle of justice by putting rational, self-interested individuals in original position and behind a veil of ignorance, and then expecting them to choose an outcome which will adhere to equality and, in the absence of equality, favor the least advantage. Now, everything we have studied till now in Rawls is summarized in 3 lines. The communitarians have several contentions with this approach. The first one, communitarian criticized Rawls for his individual-centric approach. Second is further he criticized for his ideas of original position and veil of ignorance. He essentially views individuals as isolated self in contrast to communitarians who views individuals as situated self. Michael Sandel criticizes the Rawls for resting his entire theory upon the empty metaphysics of self. Third is Alasdair MacIntyre in his After Virtue criticized Rawls for his supposed failure to acknowledge that in order to comprehend who we are, we must understand where we come from. Therefore, in reality, it will be impossible to attain Rawls' original position. So, next is to elaborate further. Communitarians believe that individual opinion are heavily influenced by his surrounding. His choice and beliefs must be viewed in context of his culture, social norms, religion, etc. Hence, isolated individual cannot be relied upon to discover the idea of justice. Fourth is communitarians point towards the difficulty in applying the concept of justice discovered behind a veil of ignorance that is in abstract situation to a concrete societal context, questioning the utility of such an idea. Fifth is communitarians have also criticized Rolfe for proposing an universal idea for justice for all, thereby failing to recognize the particularities of different communities. Despite this criticism, Rawls' theory of justice contained an element of communitarianism as evident in his notion of chain connection. Now, this is something we will write in conclusion. Last, libertarian perspective also treats liberty of the individual as its central problem, but it focuses on formal liberty and insists on minimal role of state. Robert Nozick's book Anarchy, State and Utopia sought to advance an alternative to Rawls' theory of justice. He adhered to libertarianism in its pure form, can be described as right liberal, committed to night watchman state. Nozick insisted on realistic approach which should account for the different modes of acquisition of goods and entitlement of different individuals. He identified three sources of good: themselves, natural world, and things people make by applying themselves to the natural world. Their self has brain and body. Individual has absolute right over these their own brain and body. In natural world, for example, land, water, mineral, etc., individual may acquire bits of the natural world through several methods. Principle of entitlement. This is the principle of entitlement given by uh, this Robert Nozick. Also, it has been asked in previous year. That's why I have written. Next is things people make by applying themselves to the natural world. Individuals' entitlement to these products cannot be questioned voluntary, so therefore voluntary transfers is required. So principle of entitlement. Nozick identifies three principles on which entitlement would conform to justice. Initial acquisition, first come first serve, as long as nobody is made worse off by doing so. Second is voluntary transfer, for payment of labor on voluntary contract without fear or favor. Third is ratification, involuntary transfer or unjust acquisition needs state intervention. He approved taxation only for common service, otherwise it is forced labor. And that's it for today, guys. The thing is, I what I did was I completed the previous what I have done till now, so that I will be able to remain in continuum. I hope I will be in consistency, as the name of my channel suggests. So yeah, I will be trying to finish these things on time by the end of October. Let us see if I will be able to do so. And thank you for listening to me patiently, and have a nice day.